If you've been in the Star Wars fandom as long as I have, which is to say, since I was old enough to watch movies, you'll know two things. One, the Star Wars fandom is the greatest fandom in the entire world with absolutely no internal problems, quarrels, or toxic elements. And two, that the Courtship of Princess Leia is the worst Star Wars book ever written. If you look on most worst Star Wars books lists, forums, threads, or Twitter discussions, Dave Wolverton's 1994 novel is often cited, with the most common criticism being not of the prose or the characterizations, but rather that it's a romance novel. Or more precisely, a romance novel disguised as a Star Wars book. This is apparently the worst thing ever imaginable for two reasons. One, because these reviewers seem to imply that a romance novel is the worst thing a book can be, and secondly, that a romance novel is the worst thing a Star Wars book can be. Full disclosure, I love romance novels. I actually found The Courtship of Princess Leia when I Google searched romance novel but like Star Wars because I wanted my two favorite things in the world to combine. So when I saw all the reviews for this, said it was an actual romance novel set in the actual Star Wars universe, I was like, I gotta have this. I gotta read it. And then I read it, and I don't think people know what a romance novel is. Welcome to Professional Opinion, a series I started today because I had an idea about doing a series like this about 3 weeks ago, bought this dumb doctor set off Amazon, and decided I had to make a video in this style because I now spent $10 on the costume. Support me on Patreon. In Professional Opinion, I'll be mostly using my useless degrees in theater and film studies, as well as my career as a professional writer, to pick apart media while wearing a doctor's thing on my face. Since today we'll be talking about romance novels, I guess I should tell you all that I'm a published romance author with an agent and a couple of upcoming books, so I know what I'm talking about. I'm also really invested in romance discourse and read all kinds of theory about it, and also I read a lot of this stuff. Anyway, in the first installment of Professional Opinion, wherein I'll diagnose the courtship of Princess Leia, we're going to be answering 5 main questions. 1. Is it a romance novel? 2. Why did people think it was a romance novel? 3. Does it work as a romance novel? 4. Does it work as a Star Wars novel? And 5. Why doesn't it work for readers in general? Let's talk about the Courtship of Princess Leia. Released in 1994, the book by Dave Wolverton follows the 3 protagonists of Star Wars on a wild adventure to the planet of Dathomir, where they encounter night witches, a warlord named Ginge, a dystopian matriarch, and a horde of rancors. If I explain it to you like that, it doesn't sound like a romance novel, does it? No. It just sounds like one of the hundreds of others bananas expanded universe novels that came out during the 90s. But what if I explain it to you like this? General Han Solo has been on a dangerous and bloody campaign against a warlord named Ginge with the Mon Calamari fleets for months when he returns home to visit Leia, the woman he loves and has been fighting to see ever since he left. However, upon his arrival, he can't immediately meet Leia right away, as she's welcoming visiting dignitaries from a foreign, previously isolationist system of planets called the Hapes. The Hapens ply her with gifts from their 63 worlds in an effort to build an alliance, but when Leia realizes they've only presented 62 gifts, a handsome prince named Isolder, the only son of the Queen Mother, presents himself to her and offers his hand in marriage. In exchange for accepting all of the gifts and his hand in marriage, the 63 worlds will join the fledgling New Republic and offer up all of their warriors and technical advancements to their fight against Ginge. Of course, the leaders of the New Republic, including Mon Mothma, encourage Leia to accept Isolder's offer, despite the fact that she doesn't know him, they don't know the Hapens, and Han has been moping around like a kicked puppy ever since the offer was made. Leia is torn between her love for Han and her duty to the New Republic and the refugees of Alderaan, who could use the money offered by the Hapens to settle on a new planet. Han antagonizes her about the choice. She doesn't take kindly to being bossed around. She's sort of smitten with Isolder and kisses him right in front of Han. He doesn't take too kindly to that, so he enters a Sabbat game, wins the planet, and drugs and kidnaps Leia before taking her to that planet. Oh, and somewhere in there, C-3PO discovers that Han is actually the heir to the throne of Corellia, making him a prince and therefore a suitable option for a princess. And that's just the first 50 pages of a 400-page book. After that, Han takes the kidnapped Leia, who is not happy about this arrangement, to Dathomir, the planet he's won in a card game, with the promise that if she doesn't love him again by the end of 7 days, he'll turn himself in, do jail time, and leave her free to marry Isolde. Meanwhile, Isolde and Luke team up to find the kidnapped Leia, a subplot that takes up a substantial part of the book, yet I was incapable of caring about beyond the weird homoerotic subtext flowing between them. Han and Leia crash land on Dathomir with Chewie and C-3PO. The warlord Ginge has learned of Han's whereabouts, wants to kill him, and strikes a deal with the leader of the Night Sisters for Han's life. After that, it's very complicated, very boring, with a lot of banter, fighting, bargaining, fighting, back and forth. Eventually, Isolde gets captured and falls in love with the Night Sister, and then eventually they all escape from Dathomir, defeat Ginge, and his criminal empire crumbles. Unlike the fan reaction, which characterized the book as terrible, god-awful, and not worthy of ever being read, trade publications, newspapers, and even Kirkus gave The Courtship of Princess Leia favorable reviews. The Milwaukee Sentinel said that it continued the stellar tradition of George Lucas's Star Wars movies. Kirkus said that it had firmer prose, better dialogue, and more action than any previous Star Wars novelization up to that point. Heck, the paperback and hardback landed on the New York Times bestseller list. Not a single review ever mentioned romance or romance novels. Not a single one. So what happened? How did a well-reviewed action and character-focused book with romantic elements, like a Star Wars movie, turn into a romance novel reviled by fanboys and smeared across the internet forever as one of the worst things to ever happen to the franchise?
Let's talk about romance novels.
Ba, 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 ba. The lineage of the romance novel is often traced back to Jane Austen, author of classics like Pride and Prejudice and Persuasion. However, the true godmother of what we today call the romance genre is actually Georgette Heyer, a prolific writer of romances set during the Restoration, Georgian, and Regency periods of history. Heyer essentially created the subgenre of Regency romance, but her contribution to the romance genre as a whole includes everything from the idea of a marriage market or a marriage-fueled plot, the marriage of convenience trope, the necessity of the happily ever after, etc.
She also gave us a fair deal of white supremacy. Sorry, it's true.
But the real infestation of romance, as it were, comes from, of all places, tampons.
Don't turn off the computer! Don't click away, this is actually a cool story.
At a time when American women couldn't legally own credit cards in their own name, Harlequin joined with Kotex, Ajax Cleaner, and several other brands to offer free romance novels in their packaging. When a woman was buying groceries on her husband's dime, she could hide her association with romance novels from him. And further, Harlequin's smart marketing meant they could get women hooked on romance, like a dealer outside of a middle school giving out free samples. With that, Harlequin became one of the most profitable publishers in the most profitable genre in all of literature, and thus they are the standard we're going to examine. So, what makes a romance novel? The problem with romance novels is that it's one of the most expansive genres with the pickiest and most voracious readerships. Not only are there genres like Regency romance, romantic suspense, historical romance, medical romance, contemporary romance, Amish romance, inspirational historical, inspirational romantic suspense, YA romance, new adult romance, fantasy romance, paranormal romance, and on and on and on. But there are subgenres and plot preferences within those. Not every Regency romance someone picks up is going to be to their taste because not every Regency romance has the same tropes, plots, character archetypes, heat and sensuality levels, etc. The list goes on, but generally, to be called a romance in the general sense of the genre, there are only two elements necessary to be considered one. One, the main plot of the book concerns itself with the romantic relationship between two people, or werewolves, or aliens, or whatever. And two, the book culminates in either a happy ever after or happy for now moment concerning that relationship, wherein the reader understands that the romance between the two is lasting, committed, and happy. In cases of the happy for now romance, there must be the promise of a sequel that will eventually give readers a happy ever after, or HEA, as it's often called in reader circles. This means that a lot of the things that we call romances aren't actually by genre romances. Basically, all of the Nicholas Sparks books, The Time Traveler's Wife, Lolita, these are not romances no matter what your stupid online library tells you. Just having a relationship in the book or even romantic scenarios is not enough to make it a romance. You need both elements, a romance at the center of the plot and a happy ever after for that romance. If it doesn't have those two things, then it is not a romance. However, there's also an element to these novels that's not explicit but implicit to both their creation and consumption that needs to be addressed when considering whether or not something is a romance, and that's its treatment of its female characters. Despite its reputation as a misogynistic genre that reinforces gender norms, the romance genre has always been subversive and even feminist on the whole, a truth that's particularly felt after a dramatic shift in the industry in the late 1980s, where a wave of new female editors hit the publishing industry. This shift ended what we called the old school or bodice ripper romance and ushered in the modern romance genre as it stands today. Quote, romance fiction, quote, tells the story that reflects a woman's reality as it is and as it could be, end quote, Jennifer Cruzy, a best-selling contemporary author, writes on her blog. It tells her that she is not stupid because she's female, that she understands men better than they understand her, that she has a right to control over her own life, to children, to vocational fulfillment, to great sex, to a faithful and loving partner. Romance fiction relentlessly declares that women are worthy and their interests are valid, and it is worth for them to pursue their own happiness. The third element of a romance novel, then, is something in the air of the book that gives voice to the female experience and validates it, that tells women their needs, views, and wants are respected. So if we define the romance genre by its two essential parts, a romantic relationship between two people and the book culminating in a happily ever after, the answers are essentially yes and yes for the Courtship of Princess Leia.
However, this introduces a problem for me as a critic because there's that third element which complicates things, and further, I do not believe that fans on the internet who criticize this book as a romance novel were exactly steeped in enough romance discourse to know that their categorization of the book technically works because it happens to meet an extremely low bar of two basic criteria. But now that we know about romance theory and the Courtship of Princess Leia, like a duke in need of a dowry and a rich wallflower desperate for love, let's bring them together.
What is it about the Courtship of Princess Leia that communicated romance novel and then cemented romance novel in the reader's mind? For the most part, sticking the word romance novel on this book didn't come from critics or those in the know in the romance community, but rather it came from the Star Wars community at large, which at the time was characterized by mostly fanboy masculinity that largely didn't concern itself with romance novels or the discourse surrounding them.
Let's start with the obvious: title and cover. This actually isn't the original cover under which Courtship was published. Oh no. This was.
In designing it, Bantam later acknowledged that they were inspired by the Fabio book covers synonymous with romance at the time. If you've opened up an article about romance novels, basically ever, you'll notice that the romance novel is often defined in the popular consciousness by several things: bodice ripping, female shame, heaving bosoms, and the cover model Fabio. To quote Maya Rodale, when the New Yorker wrote about HarperCollins' recent acquisition of Harlequin to the tune of $450 million, a significant portion of the post wasn't about the deal or the genre, but Fabio. So without even opening the book, the visual representation is designed to scream, this is a romance novel. Also, come on, the title, The Courtship of Princess Leia. Courtship is actually a really important word in the romance canon because the act of courtship dates back to both Austen and Hare, the godmothers of modern romance. One of the appeals of the courtship narrative is that it harkens back not only to an old-fashioned and therefore more romantic ideal of the progression of a relationship, but also that courtships are done in public. There is a thrill to the almost exhibitionist nature of a romance that takes place through the act of courtship because it's done in public, where every interaction is scrutinized and examined by friends, family, and members of your society. In this way, perhaps, fanboys were inclined to believe that the book was a romance novel because the actions of Han and Leia in this book essentially take place on a galactic stage, even when they are in love, which is almost never, considering that for the most of the book they are marooned on Dathomir with C-3PO and Chewie. The entire galaxy is aware of their movements. A marriage proposal by Isolde is witnessed by everyone in the New Republic. Everyone sees her look to Han before asking Isolde permission for more time to consider his proposal. They verbally spar in front of all of her advisors and members of the Alderaanian Council. Their love takes place in public, and that appeals to our desire to have our romance affirmed by friends and strangers. Perhaps that's why people saw this title and decided it was a romance novel.
Or maybe they saw the cheesecake pictures of Han and Leia and Isolde and a girl's name in the title and decided it was a romance novel. That seems more likely. Anyway, besides the title and the cover, what makes this a romance novel? For my first rereading of this book for this project, I read it as myself, Elise, who knows romance and knows Star Wars and loves Star Wars. Then I read it like someone who only likes one of those things. And honestly, I only came up with a couple of things. One is the kissing. This book has so much kissing. And Leia kisses a man who isn't Han, which is bonkers, and I love it! It has a marriage. And 3, it has the threat of a masculine presence / sexual threat for Han Solo, something that, to my knowledge, rarely appears in the novels and certainly never appears in the movies. And basically, that's it. Besides title, cover, and the fact that the inciting incident for the entire book is a marriage proposal, I found it really hard to view this book through the lens of a romantic fiction. While the big question, will Han and Leia get together in the end, and if so, how, is ostensibly the book's main concern, it's cluttered and crowded and bogged down by so many other plot threads and concerns that the romance part of this so-called romance book become almost non-existent.
Ba, 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 ba.
And now we get to the fun part, the section which I have called Is the Courtship of Princess Leia a Romance Novel, or Why the Entire Internet is Wrong and Elise is Right? Why isn't The Courtship of Princess Leia a romance novel?
There are so many problems in regards to the way this book treats not only its heroine, but women in general. So many problems that I'm lumping most of them together and only hitting the 3 main points. 1. Every female character besides Leia, and even including Leia at some points, is an unreasonable harpy bent on power and world domination. They're all driven by their own egos and their own desires. And this is framed as a bad thing. The Hapens are a dystopian matriarchal society which punishes masculinity in a way that weirdly echoes the Breitbart InfoWars incel crowd of today. Mon Mothma encourages Leia to take Isolde's marriage proposal for the good of the struggling New Republic, something the book frames as the cruelest, most heartless suggestion ever, even though the book also tells us the troops and the monies from the Haitians could literally create lasting peace for the entire galaxy. And Leia's reluctance to immediately refuse the offer from Isolde and her initial romantic interest in him is framed as the ultimate betrayal not only of Han, but also of herself. 2. Leia's agency and motives are constantly undercut or devalued. In an early quote-unquote love scene between her and Isolde, there's this passage. With the second, she could think of only one thing. I'm betraying Han. I don't want to hurt him. But then Isolde whispered into her ear, demanding, Come away with me to Hapes. Come and see the world which you would rule. Leia found herself crying, had never really imagined that she would let something like this happen. But at that moment, whatever attachment she ever felt for Han suddenly seemed as insubstantial as fog, as gentle white mist, and Isolde was the sun, burning it all away. With tears running down her cheeks, she tangled her arms around Isolde and promised, I'll come with you. This passage doesn't consider any of Leia's other motivations, her desire for a homeworld, her lifelong dedication to and sacrifices for the hope of peace in the galaxy, the fact that Han's been a total jerk to her since he arrived back in her life after months of being away from her, or the reality that she might really like this handsome, charming, manly, protective prince who just pages earlier stopped an attempt on her life. She's written and framed as a flimsy, flighty, fickle woman who doesn't know why she's betrayed the wonderful Han, but damn the consequences.
Princess Leia is impulsive, yes, that is absolutely clear through the way she takes charge of her own rescue in A New Hope, but she is not flighty or fickle or someone who does anything, especially when it comes to the incredibly fine balance between her personal life and her life as a leader without considering the consequences.
And, of course, the biggest one. Han kidnaps Leia.
I'm not talking any kind of cutesy mishap where they run away together and then the entire galaxy thinks that the scoundrel smuggler has kidnapped her. No. I mean, he knocks her out, drags her into the boiler room of the Millennium Falcon, and puts them into hyperspace before she can wake up, so she has to go with him to Dathomir. This is the book's biggest failing as a romance, and it's a big one. When you're writing a romance novel, you're asking people to sign on to and root for a love story to its completion. As we discussed, when you're reading a romance novel, then you know the main characters are going to end up together. It's just a question of how, so you need to root for them.
As something like Julie Garwood's The Wedding or Judith McNaught's Kingdom of Dreams teaches us, romance readers aren't actually averse to the kidnapping hero. In fact, romance readers can genuinely enjoy a plot wherein a hero begins by doing a bad thing, only for the heroine to redeem him for that action, or for him to redeem himself for that action.
It's not that this plot in and of itself is bad, but it is bad here. See, in romance novels, where the impetus for the action is a kidnapping of the heroine by a hero, we do not know the hero before he commits this act. We have no reason to think he is a good guy, but we do know Han. We know he is a good guy, and to see his character so thoroughly corrupted and see his moral compass, the moral compass we spent 3 films rooting for him to set right, degraded so far that he would literally knock out and kidnap the woman he loves and rob her of her agency. That's not the hero of a romance novel. And for all their touting of the courtship of Princess Leia, courtship here being a word that describes a dating style wherein the final step is marriage, they don't even show the marriage scene. I still haven't seen Han and Leia's wedding. God damn it!
Ba, 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 ba.
Okay, so if it doesn't work as a romance novel, does it work as a Star Wars novel? No. No, at least I don't think so. And it mostly comes down to characterization.
First of all, Dave Wolverton, the Millennium Falcon fires ion cannons, which the Millennium Falcon doesn't have, you unbelievable hack! Actually, the biggest problems with this as a Star Wars novel are actually many of the same problems with it as a romance novel. The characterizations of Han and Leia are absolutely bizarro world.
In fact, when I first started reading this book, it reminded me of another Han Solo book. It was the first book in the Young Han Solo series where Han accidentally gets looped into like this religious cult that uses like drugs and spice to control the minds of their victims. And I was convinced for the first part of this book that Han and Leia were both under the influence of a drug bought by the Hapens. Take a look at this scene where Leia finally quits being a total buzzkill and agrees to marry Han.
You won, Leia said, and her eyes were bright, full of tears. The war? Han asked, wondering if she was just trying to make him feel good. No, not hardly. Not that, Leia said. Our bet. 7 days on Dathomir? You said that if I fell in love with you all over again, I had to marry you. The 7 days isn't over yet. You won.
Let's not kid ourselves here. These are characters, but they are not Han and Leia. In the 3 movies that we watched them together, could you ever have imagined Leia admitting that Han had won or bested her in anything? Can you ever imagine Han sheepishly denying her praise that he clearly wants more than the entire world but is too ashamed to admit it, so he hides it behind boyish arrogance? No. And, the whole kidnapping thing.
Over the course of the 3 original trilogy movies, we see Han sacrifice himself and his safety for Leia's countless times. He gives her up on several occasions, even becoming a member of the establishment from which he always saw himself as separate. Han Solo would not kidnap Princess Leia, which makes our belief in this book as a Star Wars book, rather than a story in Star Wars clothes, is a stretch. In an interview describing some of the backlash to the book, Wolverton says, quote, "The idea of what if Han was stressed kind of clicked with me. What would he regress to? Having been someone who was a drug dealer and things like that, this kind of concerned me because I knew I was taking him back to a dark place that we didn't see too much of. He starts off as an anti-hero. By that, I mean is that he's a bad guy who joins the good guys. He has a lot of skills as a gunman, as a criminal, that he brings to the rebellion's table. When I looked at writing this novel, I really wanted to say, if he regressed, and he regressed back to that time, what would he do? I just kind of looked at the crazy things people do in relationships and really see what I could get away with. That was my biggest concern when I outlined it, because I knew that there would be some people who would be like, oh no, that would never happen. There are people who wouldn't want to believe that he was ever a criminal. The whole point here is that he came from a dark side, and I wanted to go back and explore that he might have been like that a little bit. Yeah, he's a little bit love crazy. He's a little bit of a stalker, a criminal. I'm just kind of taking it back to that. The issue with Wolverton's take isn't that he was being such a hashtag edgelord by exploring Han's dark side. It's that he explored that dark side in the context of Leia, something we hardly see him do in the films, something that he is not associated with. While there are certainly predatory elements to explore in that infamous kissing scene with Leia, while the two have a highly emotional style of banter, the film doesn't frame these things as negative consequences of Han's past. In fact, it's his relationship with Leia that ultimately redeems him from the darkness of his past. And for all of Wolverton's defense of this so-called regression, Han drops all of that the second he has what he wants, though he's still in a tense, high-stakes situation until the last 4 or 5 pages of the book. This characterization does not make sense.
And the problem and the beauty of Star Wars characters is that these characters are so beloved by so many people that naturally they're going to filter them to their own experiences. They'll take the things they love most about Han and Leia, Han's impulsiveness, Leia's tempestuousness, and make those the focal point rather than embracing the totality of who they are. And unfortunately, that makes buying into this entire gambit rather difficult. If we don't believe that it's actually Han and Leia going on a mission, and it's actually Mon Mothma calling the shots, that it's actually Luke making eyes at that dreamy Isolder, then we can't buy this as a Star Wars book.
Also, ion cannons? You think this hunk of junk has ion cannons? Ba 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 ba.
So we've answered most of our questions, so let's look at the final issue. Why didn't this book work for people? Like I mentioned earlier, there's definitely some issues with characterization and world building that rubs people the wrong way, and I think it's safe to say that assumptions about romance novels, sexist and uninformed though they may have been, absolutely played a part, but I want to go deeper than that. What really bothers me about the discourse surrounding courtship in general is the idea that romantic Star Wars novels are automatically a bad thing, when, if you think about it, a romantic Star Wars story is what the Star Wars movies are. They have action and family drama, yes, but you could not have the same films without the love story between Han and Leia, Anakin and Padme, Finn and Poe Dameron.
Romance is an integral part of the Star Wars universe, and its presence there is not a bug, but a feature. Romance and romantic stories teach us about our humanity, about opening ourselves up to others, and embracing our better natures for the good of someone else. You know, what Star Wars is all about.
In fact, I think it's for this reason that people actually didn't like The Courtship of Princess Leia. Because the question shouldn't be, does the Star Wars universe need a romance novel? But rather, do Han and Leia need a romance novel? Of course they don't.
In romance novels, there's a proud tradition of world continuation, meaning that the first book in a romance series will follow one pair of characters falling in love, while subsequent books follow characters from their peer or family group or someone from their world or environment. It allows audiences to get connected with the people and invest in them while not telling multiple stories about the same 2 people falling in love over and over again. That's the problem with The Courtship of Princess Leia, and part of why it doesn't work for readers.
If people went in expecting a romance, which clearly they did and were meant to based on cover art and title alone, then of course they were going to be disappointed because we've already seen Han and Leia's best love story. Their best love story has already been told, and it was told through the movies.
That's why Dave Wolverton finds himself treading over familiar story beats and rehashing popular scenes from the trilogy, even while he's trying so hard to be different. Because Han and Leia's love story, such that it is, has already been told. We've already watched them fall in love, and it was satisfying. Anything else that tries to rewrite, edit, or recontextualize their great love story is doomed to failure from the start.
So if you're looking for a romance set in the Star Wars universe, please don't pick up The Courtship of Princess Leia. You'll be disappointed in the romance, and you'll be disappointed in the Star Wars. Instead, pick up Claudia Gray's Lost Stars, or if you want a Star Wars without the trappings of canon, grab Starfall by Melissa Landers, or if you want a romance about royalty, there's Teresa Hari or Alyssa Cole's books, or you know what, I'll just put some recommendations at the end of the video. Basically, what I'm saying is that everyone can do better than The Courtship of Princess Leia, and with so many wonderful romance novels out there, and with so many wonderful Star Wars books, it's so easy to do better. I'm Elise from Cold Takes. This has been Professional Opinion, and may your love lives be as beautiful as a picture of Donald Glover as Lando Calrissian. Thank you. Oh my goodness, it hurts so bad. Oh no, it's fine. Put me on a romance cover, Bantam Press. I'm ready. I want a drink.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for watching this video. I was so excited to make it, so I hope you enjoyed it. If you like my work, please like and subscribe and join me over on Patreon. Also, I did want to point out that I used fairly heteronormative terms in this video, and I wanted to apologize for not including queer romance in my discussion of the romance genre. Queer romance is a huge part of the modern romance market, but since I was discussing a straight couple, I discussed the subject matter in heteronormative terms. I'm sorry about that, and I wanted to explain myself. If you're interested in learning more about queer romances, Book Riot and alovesotrue.com have some great resources. And if you want to learn more about romance generally, I recommend both Beyond Heaving Bosoms and Dangerous Books for Girls, both great resources that helped me a lot as a romance author and when I was writing this video. Again, I hope you enjoyed it, and please like, subscribe, and share, and join me over on Patreon. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Oh man, I did the whole thing without my pearls. Alright, start over.